everyone. Welcome to In the Lead with Jennifer Sang. Today is the very first conversation that I am hosting on this podcast. So I am super excited. And I got the chance to interview Rebecca McNeill, who is a self love and embodiment coach based out of Phoenix, Arizona. And I've known Rebecca now for a couple of years. And, every time we talk in our conversations, I'm always just so eager to have these dialogues. We just can talk for hours and we're just always on the same vibe and we're just always having these great in-depth conversations. So I'm really excited to be able to bring to you that conversation to all of the podcast listeners. Rebecca McNeill is a self-love and embodiment coach, like I said, based out of Phoenix, Arizona. She helps her clients identify imbalances in their own relationship with mind, body, and soul, and works with them to restore a sense of harmony. This transformative work allows clients to improve their relationship with self and, in turn, improve all the relationships they have in their lives with people, places, work, money, and much more. Rebecca is a desert native, hiking enthusiast, iced coffee connoisseur, writer, and avid reader. She is passionate about self discovery and self awareness, developmental trauma and healing, which we do touch on a bit in the podcast today, and making safe spaces in the world so others can feel confident stepping into their authentic expression. Rebecca is currently offering a program called Step Into Your Harmony, where she leads clients to help them identify areas out of balance in their lives, create and implement practices to restore harmony, and move into alignment towards their intentions and goals, which gives them more fulfilling relationships and experience more joy every single day. In the show notes, I will include ways that you can get in touch with Rebecca if you're interested. And in this conversation, we dissect trust. What does trust mean in organizations? What does trust mean to self? What does trust mean in relationship to being in the lead? So, this was a great conversation. I look forward to sharing it with you, and I hope you enjoy. So, welcome, Rebecca McNeill. Thank you for joining my podcast. Rebecca is a self love and embodiment coach. And today we're on the podcast to talk about trust. So, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So, I first of all, I always love our conversations. So you were a natural person for me to ask first to be like, you need to be on my podcast because I feel like every time we talk, I could probably hit record and post it and it would be just gold because I feel like our conversations just always morph and evolve and kind of take on a life of its own. So I truly admire our relationship that we developed and the conversations that we have. And I'm looking forward to sharing that with everybody on the podcast today. So I wanted to, and we had kind of talked about this originally a few weeks ago, but trust was something that came up in a leaders chat. So on Twitter, I facilitate a conversation every Wednesday at 5 o'clock Pacific called Leaders Chat. And the topic was about trust and trust in leadership. And it just got my brain kind of going all kinds of ways and feeling all kinds of feels. And you and I had a conversation the very next day, and I was just like, help me break this down. Tell me I'm not crazy because I feel like trust is this really kind of gauzy, false construct that we've all developed as a way to protect ourselves. So maybe the first question starting off to you is how do you define trust?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I'm super excited to have this conversation as well. Um, Man, trust defined. Uh, I feel like I need some context. So many of these big words get thrown around, and there's so many different like facets to them, and what they mean in different situations, different contexts. Um, so trust, I feel like most commonly how it comes up is like how much can I rely on this other person to be what they say they're going to be, do what they say they're going to do, show up how I'm expecting them to show up. um, I think usually it comes up in the context of relationships with
Mhm.
others. So
Mhm.
that's not a Merriam-Webster definition, but
Right.
that's how I would define it.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, that's where my mind went first too. Was it was like, okay, so it's some kind of an expectation or agreement for some future behavior or outcome. So we do see it a lot, right? Especially within relationships, friendships, and even in organizations too. I know working in my organization, I hear that word a lot of trust. Like we have to trust each other, we have to trust leadership, and I don't know, it's just always kind of rubbed me the wrong way because it feels almost like there's some kind of accusation there, like you don't trust. So,
Mm.
and you have to trust, or else you can't be a part of this. Or if you mess up, that trust goes away. So it just always feels very, I don't know, like there's some catch or there's some like you need to perform a certain way, and if you don't, then it almost feels divisive is maybe what I'm trying to say, is like it's either you're with us or you're not with us, or you're them or you're us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. And what's coming up for me too is almost like the transactional nature of it, right?
Mm,
Like there's some sort of exchange going on. So like I will trust you if you do this for me or give me this or show me this. And as soon as that
mm,
expectation, like you said, or agreement is broken, okay, the trust disappears. It's gone. So
yeah.
I think that's interesting because it's like I think you see different forms of trust. There's the kind where people talk about like we're talking about something you earn. And then I've noticed in my own life that in just the way I was brought up and not in an unconscious way, trust is given automatically in certain situations,
Mm,
um, which can be good, can also be dangerous.
mm,
so so that's something interesting too. But yeah, there's definitely it's like a co-constructed type of situation or yeah,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point because that's something that I think about a lot too, is I think trust means something different to everybody. Like we're all from different experiences and backgrounds. We all look at it different. We all that line that we hold for trust is different for everybody. So it just always interest and intrigue me when we just make blanket statements like we just need to trust one another. Well, what is I mean, how do we break that down? Like what are you looking for? And the first place my mind went when I was thinking about trust during this conversation we had a few weeks back was we inherently just trust certain situations. Like for instance, you get in your car, you drive down the road, you're just naturally trusting that someone's not going to veer into your lane and hit your car. Or you go to a restaurant, you're trusting that the cook is not going to spit in your food. You don't know these people, but yet you have this trust. And where it came to me was it almost came back to this sense of control and safety. Um, for me,
Yeah.
what it boiled down to was it's all about safety and it's all about vulnerability. And that's really what we're trying to protect, um, is by saying, I need to be able to trust you. Like I tell you a secret and you're not going to share that. And to me, it was interesting to me to kind of think through like all the different ways that we trust people and how in certain scenarios it becomes like um more focused or more intense depending on the person or the situation.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point because it's like certain situations involve more risk, right?
Mhm.
So there's some situations where trusting is easy because you're not going to lose face or be rejected or whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
So like at a restaurant, it's kind of it's easy to trust. There's not a lot of emotional attachment going on. You know, I mean, people get serious about their food, but but all of that aside, you know, the food is not going to come out and reject us or insult us or shame us for showing certain vulnerability.
Mhm.
So those are sort of like low risk given type of situations. Whereas in a intimate partnership where you're sharing something, vulnerable, sensitive, fragile from deep down inside of you, um, that's a lot more risky. And from, our biologically primal system point of view, um, that's anxiety invoking. Your survival antenna go up and it's like surveying the area. Is this safe in here? Am I safe to be me? Am I safe to show up? And and once you get into that aspect of things, I mean, it's like, Mary Poppins carpet bag just infinitely full of stuff. There's so much
Right.
that plays into um our trust in those types of situations. It's much more tricky to navigate. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think I think you're definitely onto something. Um, it's easier to trust, and it's easier for it to just be a given in certain situations versus others where we look at it a lot more closely.
Yeah. And when you were talking about risk, I mean, I was thinking like even in your car, like there's a lot of risk. I mean, you could die. Like, I mean,
Mm,
somebody could literally just decide, hey, I'm going to just T-bone you and take you out. But yet, and again, I don't want to induce any like fears here for anybody, but I mean, I do think about it. It's just like we just inherently trust that the person driving on the other side of the road is going to stay in their lane and we're going to get to our place destination and it'll be fine. And that's interesting to me because there is quite a bit of risk there if you think about it.
mm,
um, but maybe not risk in the sense of kind of that internal safety that you were talking about, which I think is some of the riskiest places within us, that it's kind of scary to go to. And I was thinking also as you were talking about like, how do you see trust as like in relation to the self love and embodiment that you want to pursue and are passionate about?
yeah, I mean, trust is a huge component of the work that I do. Um, and it's just in all of these things, and I'm sure you would be on the same page with this. It's like a lot of times individuals are really focused on the things outside of them, like their relationships with other people and their job and their family and this kind of stuff. um and so much of the discord or like challenges that come up in that are reflecting something that's going on inside or some sort of like internal dynamic. And so, to bring this full circle back to the question of trust, um, I work a lot just, my personal journey and then with clients on the self trust. What does it mean to trust oneself? Because if there is a lack of inner safety, a lack of inner trust for a variety of reasons, this can happen. Um, you just go out into the world in a much more I want to say vulnerable way. Maybe you
Mm.
don't present yourself that way. Maybe you actually present yourself as, rock solid with all of your armor, but but you're approaching it from a much more vulnerable place, on the inside. And when I say vulnerable, I just mean like more susceptible to being hurt or wounded. Um, because when you don't trust yourself, you're allowing other people a lot more power and influence over you, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
so so yes, I do see trust a lot, but I try to maybe when like with clients, if there's some sort of trust type of thing going on outside of them, then we try to kind of turn that inwards and see what else is going on. Get curious.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I kind of came to the conclusion I came to around trust was that if we are allowing that trust to live outside of us, that power, that control, that perception, whatever, if it's living in someone else by me saying, Rebecca, I need to be able to trust you because I tell you the secret, you can't tell anybody. You have all the power, right? Like I've given that up. But for me, trust just feels intrinsic. Like if you hold that trust intrinsically and you're good with all that vulnerability, all the wounding, all the trauma, if you trust yourself, like Rebecca, I'm giving you this information and hoping that you don't share it. And even if you do, I'll be okay. Like
Yeah.
the world doesn't end. It doesn't, And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean I can never trust you again because internally I know. And when I'm in the lead, I know that I'm okay and I can do the work that I need to do to heal and kind of deal with those vulnerabilities as they come up. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
you hit on the key point there, that self-trust is a huge component of that, is knowing that no matter what happens, like, I'll be okay. I trust
Mhm.
myself to pick myself up off the floor and move through this. Or I trust myself to, even if I need to lay on the floor in a heap for however long, I will be there with myself. I'm not going to abandon myself in that, you know? Um, yeah, and it's it's just like in a relationship, like in a
Mhm.
intimate partnership, right? You want to, when you speak of trust, it's like I need to know, I need to trust that no matter how messy I show up, you're not
Mm.
going to leave me. You're not going to abandon me just because
Mhm.
I'm not whatever perfect version I'm supposed to be or something, you know what I mean? But
Right.
just as we might want to demand that from a partner,
Mhm.
we also have to, show up for ourselves in that way.
Mhm.
And I know, it's easy for us to talk about this, and it's easy for
Mhm.
me to talk about it now and be like, yes. But this has been a really huge part of my journey and something that I've really struggled with a lot, stepping into that self trust. And I know I can remember distinctly, it was like a couple years ago, but I remember distinctly I was really getting into a lot of like inner child work and like reparenting and just kind of firing up that inner dialogue inside of me that would come
Mhm.
up. And I remember this one situation where I was really struggling. I was having like some tough emotions, and I was out in public. I was at like a weekend soccer game with the family. And um and I remember having this conversation with myself, and I was trying to, reparent and comfort myself and be like, you know what, it's going to be okay. I'm here for you. And I kept getting this, like, I don't believe you. Like, there was a part of me that was like, I don't believe you. You haven't showed up for me for so many years. And I know I can like see that you're trying to show up for me, but I don't believe you yet. So there was this inner dynamic of not like I hadn't earned my own trust, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It wasn't a given. And so, excuse me. And that really got me thinking, because it was a hard place to be. You read all these books and all this stuff about these things and building this relationship for yourself. And I was like, okay, I know exactly how to get there. And I'm having this conversation, but we're not there. So how do I build this trust for myself? And how do you build trust for yourself or in a relationship outside of you? It's the same thing. You
Mm.
keep showing up. You show
Yeah.
up intentionally. You show up with your whole heart. Um, and you keep showing yourself or this other person who you are. And it's not like you're not doing it just to gain the trust. You're doing it because it's who you are. And over time, that can flower and grow and become stronger.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really beautiful. I love you were talking about reparenting. Your whole story just reminded me of my own kind of therapy journey and thinking about how I also suffered with a lot of as I'm starting to show up more and more for myself. Parts of parts of me were like, "Yeah, I don't believe you. Like, you haven't been here for 40 years. Like, why are you showing up now? Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do for us, right?" And what was interesting was it was very uncomfortable. Like, I feel like a lot of times, especially with inner work, a lot of people are afraid because it is very uncomfortable. Just like a lot of things in life, it is not easy. It's not comfortable. But the more you kind of come back to it and you sit with it longer, come back to it over that consistency that you build, it starts to build that trust and it starts to become, like you said, it starts to flower and it starts to blossom. And it's not that same resistance and like skepticism that you can feel where it's like, okay, this isn't going to work. Um, but it's that uncomfortable place that I feel like we try to avoid a lot. Um,
Yes.
I see that a lot. And for me, it was just my therapy journey and really showing up for myself and sitting through really uncomfortable things and really showing up for myself was really kind of the key turning point, at least in my life, knowing that if I can show up for myself, like in that moment, I can show up for myself in almost any moment. Like, even if somebody betrays trust, or even if someone, hurts you in some way, like you can always come back to knowing you can make it through that discomfort.
Yeah.
Um, so it's definitely a journey. And I love that. I just love your story about the reparenting, because that totally resonates with me. That's totally my
Yeah.
jam.
Yeah, no,
um,
for sure. I appreciate what you said though about the discomfort, being
mhm,
uncomfortable. And I think that it's important to kind of like stop and acknowledge that, because I think originally, like initially when I hear somebody saying that, like, oh, inner work is hard, you got to be up for the discomfort. Um that in this moment it's not like provoking too much, but I know in the past hearing something like that would just provoke shame. So
mm,
immediately even hearing that, I would just be like, oh god, like I'm not willing to work hard enough for myself, and like and just start saying these
yeah,
silly things to myself about that. um and I think it's okay to be uncomfortable with embracing discomfort. Like just because
yeah,
um the way to doing the inner work is to go through some of that discomfort doesn't mean you just need to throw yourself into it and just get as uncomfortable as possible all the time. um I maybe that works for some people, but in my cultivating of trust, inner trust, that would have been a trust breaker. You know what I mean? Because if I was like, I'm going to show up for you, and then they're like, I don't know, and then I'm like, okay, let's go do something really painful and horrible, and you're going to feel like shit. I mean, crap. um that's not they're gonna that part that's protesting, like, I don't want to trust you, is gonna be like, what are you doing? Like, thought you said you were gonna show up for me. And you're
mhm,
making it even worse. So all of that to say that I think a lot of times too we approach this work from like a mind space, and obviously the mind is really important. But part of like the what I try to say, the resistance to the discomfort is because it's not just like mental discomfort. There's actually like body discomfort, like physiological discomfort. And it's even more uncomfortable because oftentimes we totally ignore it.
yeah,
And we're completely out of touch with it. And so it's our bodies are constantly trying to communicate with us. And if we
mhm,
just, we ignore it, it gets louder and louder. Um, so I think that as we're on these journeys, and trying to build that trusting relationship, I think it's also important to think about how we can expand the way that we show up for ourselves.
mhm,
So and like expand how you personally can show up for yourself, because that's going to look different, to different people, what is going to work best for them. um and it's not a one size fits all approach, and it's also like, there might be, as we're learning this, the person, whoever, if someone's mentoring you or you're reading a book or whatever, you might be handed like the shoebox that has some tools, and that's really only the beginning, because you can show up for yourselves in those ways, but then I always like want to encourage people to be more creative and thinking about how they can show up for themselves.
yeah,
um because that's really, it's sort of like, you meet somebody new and you want to go out on like a cool date or something, and you really like them a lot. So yeah, you've done the dinner and a movie, maybe you've done some walking at the park, and then you want to come up with like some really cool, like unique date idea to show them how special they are to you. you know and it's sort of like going out of your way to find that special thing, uh to show up for yourself, you know so
mhm.
um yeah, I'm trying to close the gap here of how I got from like discomfort to expansively showing up for yourself. But I guess I feel like there definitely are moments of discomfort, but we can ease our way into it. It doesn't have to be, a painful type of discomfort, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I always look at it as 2 ways to jump in the pool. You can either go running in, cannonball it in, which just happens to be my personal preference. Like, I'm not a, like, take the steps one at a time. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think there is, like, a defined, "This is how you have to do it." And one thing I wanted to touch on about discomfort, because I think that is so key, is that you mentioned, like, it's okay to be uncomfortable with the discomfort. Like, that is totally okay. It's not something's wrong with you, or you just have to feel into it, and it's like this, like, kumbaya moment. It's beautiful and it can be really messy and hard, and that's okay. I think it's we build our muscle, or we build our we lessen the resistance the more we go to it. So we feel a lot of resistance in the beginning, but the more you keep coming back, you'll notice that there's more space. That's
Yeah.
great. And what came up for me, which has been a very powerful moment that I think about so much in my, and of course, my therapy journey, was sitting on the couch. And how you said it's a physical thing. I remember my therapist and I were talking about something that was just really traumatic for me. And sitting there and feeling in my body like the most dreaded panic attack you could ever feel. My body was just like on fire. My heart was beating. I just felt like I couldn't sit there any longer. And what was interesting for me in that moment was I noticed there was a narrative. There was a narrative going on separate from the conversation I was having with my therapist that was saying, you need to get the hell out of here right now. Like, it
Mm.
felt life or death. It was like a real panic attack. But I noticed all of the sensations in my body. I noticed kind of the story that was being told. The mind was making up based on the physical response that I was having in that moment. And it took a lot of courage and a lot of discomfort for me to say, it's okay. I can sit here through this. We're okay. Like, I had to really be very mindful and really force myself to stay, but it was that discomfort. It was feeling it in my body so strongly, but then also hearing the story
Yeah.
that was going on in addition to that. So noticing all those different components and also staying with it. I think doing that over and over again has just helped, I've noticed, for me, expand kind of that threshold that I have around that discomfort. And now it's not as strong. I mean, it still comes up even 15 years later, Rebecca, I swear. I say to my some therapist sometimes, I'm like, when will it get, like, when will this go away? And she's like, it may never go away. And that's
Mm.
okay. But it's just your body's reaction to something. And just knowing that, and really, again, trusting that I can, I can be okay in discomfort. Like, it's really okay.
Yeah.
But that was just such a, I always reflect on that moment because it was just so, like, etched in my mind of, like, that is exactly what you go through on a daily basis, and can you stay with that discomfort?
Yeah.
Um, so, and, but definitely a physical thing. I mean, I notice that a lot, is there's a lot going on in the body that I don't think we acknowledge enough.
Yeah, there's so much in that story that you just shared. I really appreciate sharing that. It's like bringing up so many things for me. And the first thing that's coming up is that I want to say I had a similar experience, but not exactly quite the same. But I had sort of like a turning point experience when it was actually with my brother. I was some things had happened in my life, and I just had gone into a downward spiral. And I've suffered a lot with mental health issues most of my life, and I felt I'd been doing really good for a while, and then some things had happened, and I just felt like I had been sparked into like depression again, and it scared me so much because I was feeling these things that I hadn't felt in a really long time, and it was like, oh my gosh, like, am I going to be able to get through this? Like, am I going to be okay? And at the time, I'd been reading a lot about like trauma and about nervous system regulation and activation and all those types of things, and learning more about somatic type of practices. And I was just investigating. I wasn't, working with anybody. But my brother, we had a phone call, and he encouraged me on that phone call he just stayed with me, held space, to just feel into the emotional experience that I was having. And to, as much as possible, completely shut out the mind. And this is extremely challenging for me. Um, I am a very cerebral person. Like my mind is always going. And even in the past when I had tried to like feel emotions in my body and stuff, I was seeing them, because people talk about, what is how does it feel? Is it moving? Is it staying the same? Is it hot? Is it cold? And so I'd be like seeing in my brain like swirls, and I had to be like, no, like go back into the stomach and just like feel the swirls.
Mhm.
But it was sort of like this magical experience. I don't know, we're on the phone for maybe like 2 hours, and it was the first time in 30 something years that I had ever just felt and didn't have the dialogue about what I was feeling, like just kind of quieted that. Because you were saying that you're having this intense physiological and mental experience, and you're witnessing the the sort of dialogue that was happening, the discourse that was
Mhm.
happening in your head, and which is powerful. There's so much awareness that can come through for that, and it for me it was like I needed to go even further than that, just like totally shut off the dialogue, because they play into each other, right? Like
Yes.
I read recently, like the emotional, when we have these emotions come up, the physiological response, like if we were to just not think anything about it, just let our bodies do its thing, it's like 90 seconds. It lasts for
Mhm.
90 seconds and you move
Yeah.
through it. um I I was gonna say, I don't think I've ever just felt anything for 90 seconds. My brain is just way too active for
I
that. You know
know,
what I mean?
right?
But
Yep.
hearing that was just like, oh my God. Like if
Mhm.
I could just shut off my brain, the thinking part of it, for 90 seconds and just like feel this move through me, and then move
Mhm.
on with my day, instead of it like, putting me into a 6 month depression or
Right?
something.
Imagine how much
Um
suffering we all cause ourselves
yeah.
by really latching on to those. And that and my I the first therapist I ever saw was actually a somatic therapist, and that was one of the best experiences of my life because it was all about getting back into the body. But one of the things or metaphor she gave me really early on that stuck with me was it's like stubbing your toe. You know, when you get that initial like ow my gosh, like, oh, like it really, really hurts, but then it like slowly kind of subsides. And then after like a couple minutes, you're like, oh, I didn't stop. What happened? Like nothing. But it's that whole like, and I look at anxiety and panic attacks similarly. It's like, yeah, you'll notice it has a very defined start and end point, but we can extend that depending on how much we feed into it, how much our story starts to latch on and take over. But if physiologically, it's actually not that long, at least for me, I've noticed it doesn't last more than like 10 or 15 minutes, like
Yeah,
physically.
and I feel
That's
like
it.
too, if we I feel like this okay, how do I say it? It's like troubleshooting, right? So this is
Mhm.
it's like when you have this intense thing come up, you try to just let it move through you. And sometimes, these emotions are happening like because of a story or because of something happened. Sometimes they're just purely like some physiological thing is happening and it registers as an emotion, but it's not meaningful. It's not related
Mhm.
to anything. It's just the body like doing its thing.
Mhm.
Um and but I really feel like too, because I always try to play like devil's advocate, and like what would I have thought about this if you had told me this like, 3-4 years ago? I would have been like, oh well, that's just like denying my emotions more and just like ignoring myself, and I'm just like gaslighting myself or whatever, like, oh, it's not a big
Mhm.
deal or whatever. So like if you're having any thoughts like that, I'll speak to that really quickly. I feel like give your body a chance to do its thing.
Mhm.
And if emotions are communicating something to us, right? So if there's something that's meant to be communicated through it, that will come up for you. That emotion will keep returning. And maybe you'll
Mhm.
see like that you're having it 10 times a day, every single day. And then maybe like we need to do something more with that. Um, but, but as a good, like, just troubleshooting measure, if we just tried that, like, let him move through me for a minute and a half, how much of this like turmoil could we avoid? And then just really pay
Yeah.
attention to like the things that really need to be um addressed. But what I wanted to say too, I think it's wonderful that you had support to move through that. And I think a lot of people need that support because it's scary. Like you don't trust that you can get through it on your own. But I also feel like once you have done it a couple of times, even just after the first time, like show up for yourself to move through something difficult, however that is in your life, automatically you're just like, oh, sitting taller. Like there's
Yep.
so much more confidence now. Um, After I had that whole situation with my brother, like later on I would feel something would happen and I'd feel that same like sense coming back to me, like that pit in my stomach. Everything is hopeless, like the world is going to crap, like all those
Yeah.
things, like the dialogue starts. And then, but I've noticed that it's so much easier to be like, okay, this is not going to last. Like, okay, I know I'm feeling whatever these feelings are in my body right now, and it's totally awful, but I know I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was a big change for me because I think every single time in the past that I'd ever felt anything like sad, lonely, depressed, anxious, I truly thought like I wasn't going to get through it and I wasn't going to be okay.
Hmm.
And I'm laughing about it, but that is a horrible way to go through life. And I think a lot of people are moving through life feeling that way.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's just, yeah, it's a tough inner dynamic to exist within.
It is. And one thing you said that I want to highlight that I think is kind of at the crux of where I've come to, is especially around trust, is like you said, with confidence, it's something that you build. I also believe that trust is also something that you build. It's not something necessarily earned. To me, when I hear you need to earn that trust, it's almost like the carrot, right? We're dangling a carrot
Mm,
out into the future and saying, okay, do you are you passing the test? Are you good enough? Are you, but it's more of something that we build day by day. And by constantly going back to that inner space, that discomfort, and doing little doses, right? It's not, you don't have to be like me. I'm a cannonball jumper, but I know a lot of people aren't. You don't have to jump in to the deep end. You can take one step at a time, right? Dip your toe into the pool, dip it out, and then but notice, right? And I also love how you talked about the just the noticing piece and pausing and saying, how did I show up? How did that make me feel? Let me scan my body. Let me check what's going on, because I feel like, at least from my standpoint, the more that I've been able to cultivate that inner kind of trust and inner knowing, I feel more, speaking especially around leadership, I feel more in the lead. I'm not necessarily dependent on my boss or other external influences validating me or providing me something. Like I know I got myself, because I know I've been through all those discomforting moments when I wanted to just like leave, and I can get through that. I can get through anything, and it's not something earned, because it's not something you can necessarily take away. That's something you build internally.
yes.
So I loved your story. That was really, really beautiful, and I think it really puts a nice little bow around kind of the trust in the inner work, because it's all about cultivating it and building it.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's definitely something that's built. And I feel like it's a much more empowering way to look at it too, because if you see the building, like maybe you're building a brick wall, and each day you're adding another brick,
Mm-hmm.
and the beauty of that is like sometimes we aren't going to show up for ourselves, and sometimes we're going to make mistakes, just like other people we have relationships with. And just because you don't add a couple bricks one day or a few of them fall off doesn't mean the whole wall goes away. It's not like the whole thing
Hmm.
just tumbles down. So that allows us to have grace for ourselves and for others, in the times when things aren't super great, but you can
Yeah.
still keep going and keep building up. You don't have to start over from scratch.
Right.
You don't have to start over from scratch. And I'm definitely a toe dipper. Like I am not a cannonball jump in. It's cold. Sometimes that's appropriate, and sometimes I do want to do that, and I honor that. But mostly, I'm a toe dipper, like inch by inch. And I think that it's good to know that about yourself and
Hmm.
be attentive to that. And we can um, sort of, what's the word I want to use? Like soften or pillow the uncomfortable experiences. So like that's another way to build trust, but another brick in the wall and show up for yourself isn't like a lot of times we have to face uncomfortable situations and we know it's coming.
Mhm.
And so it's like, I don't have a choice. I have to do this. How can I set myself up for it to go into it in the best possible way? And then how can I set things up to take care of myself afterwards because I know that it's going to be tough on me. Um,
Mhm.
so it's not necessarily just about like in the moment how you show up for yourself, but it's like, the before and after parts too,
Mhm.
like showing up for yourself in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the whole experience for sure.
Mhm.
So, given all that we talked about, what is one piece of advice you could give somebody who might be interested in building kind of that internal trust? What's one thing
Mm.
that they can do?
Oh, that's such a good that's such a great question. um, I think, the number one first thing that you can do if you're not doing anything already is to make a little more space to show up for yourself in your life. Make a practice of just being with you for whatever it is, whatever the experience is. Um, I know, I don't know, I feel like for a lot of years, I was ignoring parts of myself. And so it's really hard to build trust with somebody that ignores you because you just feel like, well, I don't matter.
Mhm.
Um, so so I think like intentional time to be with yourself and get to know yourself and find out, how do you respond to discomfort? What helps you self-soothe after you've been in a very uncomfortable situation? Are you a cannonball, like just jump into something crazy, or are you like a toe dipper? Know that about yourself.
Mhm.
So those types of things. That'd be my one piece of advice. Like just cultivate intentional time to get to know yourself.
Awesome. And so let's say somebody is doing that. Let's say they're cultivating that, but they're just facing a ton of discomfort and they're facing a lot of just physical, mental, emotional kind of reactions. And they're finding it difficult to really kind of be present with that. Is there any words of wisdom you could give somebody who might be struggling with it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone's unique, so that's like a tough question to answer, but generally, I would say, that it's really helpful to have some support, whatever that looks like, whether it's from a therapist, whether it's from a good friend, a mentor, a coach, somebody safe, um, that's very, very important. But I know for it's like if you're out in the ocean, just in this boat, and you're just like up in the waves and down the waves, like you're just all over the place. Sometimes it's nice to have like a solid thing to hold on to. Like when you're putting your shoe on, you got to stand on one foot. It's nice to have a shoulder to just like of somebody else to put your arm on.
Hmm.
So a lot of times in this type of work, um, opening up to having some sort of support can be just a huge game changer.
Yeah.
Um, and especially if you have trust issues, and no shame is intended in that because some people could say that about me. um, it's that's part of all of this, right? Is being willing to trust somebody,
Mm.
being allowing somebody to show up for you, and who's to say, right? There's a lot of dialogue in like the self love world, like you can't love somebody else until you love yourself. Um, and there's some truth to that, but I wouldn't say that's like a end all be all. So when it comes to trust, um, where I'm not saying you can't trust other people until you trust yourself. Like that's not how it works. It's a co-creative thing,
Mhm.
and I think the more you open up and allow yourself to trust others, the more you can cultivate that within yourself, and then that grows more, and then you can open up more. It's just this constantly moving together thing. But yeah.
Yeah. I love the way you said that, the co-creative process, because I tend to see it the same way, is that it is a creative process that you create together, and sometimes it can be really strong, sometimes it's not, but I think it's that safety element that you were hitting on. I think that is really important, especially with therapists or coaches or mentors, like you said, somebody that you can really be your full self with and bring your whole self, even the frazzled, uncomfortable, crazy, everything part, like bring all of those parts forward and be able to be safe so that you can sit through it. Because really, at the end of the day, I tell my therapist that's what I feel like she's doing for me is just providing a safe space for me to just completely come undone and then put
Yeah.
myself back together and sit through all of it and observe it and just be there with it. So I feel like I love what you said with the co-creative piece because that's how it feels to me as well. Um, Especially when we're talking about organizations and teams and families and friendships. I mean, I feel like it is a co-creative process and it's not linear and it's not just this like cut and dry, like you earn it and then you have it and then it's gone. To me, it feels more fluid than that.
Yeah,
So I
definitely.
appreciate that perspective.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
awesome. Well, thank you for your time today. I would love to give you some space for any closing thoughts or anything you wanted to share with the guests or listeners of the podcast.
Well, I don't know if I have any concluding thoughts. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. There's so many places to go with this type of conversation, but I guess I want to say that the ending thought that's coming up for me is just really that this is something that we can build and acquire over time. So it's like I feel like a lot of times we talk about this stuff and we want the whole pie, the whole trust pie. Like I'm just gonna self
Mhm.
trust myself and trust others. Just give me the whole thing. And this is really about like just like a little by little, you know, like how can I build a little bit of trust with myself today? How can I open up a little bit more to trust this person today? How can I cultivate more safety in my relationships today? And like little by little, you go getting the pieces of the pie. So I think just focus on what it is that you can do today. You know, and it's good to keep the long term in mind, but just breaking off little bites if this is a challenge for you,
Yeah.
you know.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And I agree. I always feel like it's always pulling me back to kind of the present moment. That's how I kind of look at the journey is
Yeah.
sometimes I get carried away and, 1 year, 6 months, tomorrow, but it's always somehow pulling me back to be like, nope, come right back here and let's deal with the discomfort in this moment. That's all we can in, everything that's happening in the moment. Um,
Yeah.
so I appreciate that. So where can people find you online?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to connect with everyone. You can find me on social media, mainly on Facebook and Instagram. My handle is Rebecca Moon with zeros as the O's. And also, you can check out my website, conversationsforgrowth.com, conversations and then the number four, growth.com. If you want to check out any of my coaching containers, we also do a virtual book club. I'm super excited about that.
Awesome.
And I do have a blog on Medium as well under Rebecca Moon. So yeah, I'd
Awesome.
love to continue the dialogue.
Great. And I'll be sure to include those links in the notes for the show so that people can, find your website and connect with you as well. But I just wanted to say thank you. It is
Yeah.
always, always such an enlightening conversation with you. And I feel like I could always talk to you for like 6 hours. But
I
I'm
feel
not
the
going to
same
torture
way.
people on the podcast with a 6 hour conversation. But I definitely feel like I have to bring you back at some point and we have to continue the dialogue and have more discussions. So I
Yeah, for
appreciate you.
sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen. It was a pleasure to be here.